Fourth representative of Russian Federation.
Благодарю вас.
Thank you, President. First, we'd like to express our heartfelt condolences to the bereaved families and friends of the passengers and crew members of the Malaysian flight which crashed in Donetsk, as well as to the governments of those countries whose citizens were on the list of victims of this tragedy. There's a need for impartial, open investigation of what happened. Pressure shouldn't be brought to bear on this investigation, trying to prejudge its outcome with broad statements and insinuations that are unjustified. In such a difficult situation, we think it would be right to create an international commission under ICAO. Mr. President, for any normal person, I'm sure, first and foremost, a question would arise. Why did the Ukrainian aviation dispatchers send a passenger flight to an area of military clashes, an area which was being used for carrying out strikes against civilian targets, amongst others, and where there were anti-aircraft systems working, ensuring the security and effective use of civilian aviation in an airspace of a state is the responsibility of that state, in line with international standards. On the territory where the flight is being carried out, the state must provide aviation information necessary for ensuring the security of aviation information or relations. International law plans for the possibility of a timely closure by the state of areas that are difficult for or dangerous for flights. It would seem that there would need to be investigation not only of the disaster, but also the extent to which the Ukrainian aviation authorities carried out their obligations and used rights necessary and did everything necessary so as to ensure that the military campaign of Kiev would prevent disasters from occurring. Today, Kiev declared a full closure of the airspace for the conducting of the so-called anti-terrorist operation. Why couldn't this have been done earlier, not waiting for hundreds of victims to be incurred? Sir, during our last meeting on Ukraine, some Western colleagues of the Council talked about the restraint of the Kiev authorities in the use of force. Well, here's that restraint now. In Donetsk and Lugansk, there's been storming by aviation, artillery, tanks, as well as volley fire and strikes that are indiscriminate in nature. The punitive operation is increasingly full-scale in terms of disaster for civilian structures and infrastructure. There have been dozens of civilians killed, as well as transport systems destroyed, and community targets and medical centers. According to the UNHCR's data, there are more than 4.5 million people in eastern Ukraine in the area of clashes, but there's been no evacuation of civilians from these areas by Kiev. People have to leave the areas of military clashes by themselves, by risking their life. There are many reports that people fleeing war, in particular seeking refuge in Russia, are intentionally targeted by the Ukrainian armed forces. This time, Russia has hosted more than 110,000 refugees from eastern Ukraine, and the number rises with every day. This data is confirmed by the UNHCR. In this regard, in 6 regions of Russia, an emergency state has been declared. The artillery and mortar shelling by the Ukrainian armed forces into Russia has become regular. The targets are cross-border crossing points as well as peaceful civilians. There are killed and wounded amongst our civilians. We are seeing these provocations as aggressive acts from the Ukraine side with respect to the sovereign Russian territory and citizens of the Russian Federation. We place all blame on the Kiev powers or government and call for the Ukrainian side to take decisive measures to stem such incidents in the future. Sir, we many times warned about the about the danger of a forceful solution to the political crisis in Ukraine and called for inclusive dialogue, reciprocally respectful between all political forces, Kiev and the regions. However, at a crossroads moment, Kiev chose the wrong path, and their Western colleagues supported them. And of course, I'm talking about the US here. They actually pushed them to escalate the crisis. They are trying to lay the blame for the catastrophe caused by this path on Russia. 21 February's agreement was cast aside, as well as the roadmap proposed by the OSCE chairman. The Geneva Declaration from 17 April and the Berlin Declaration from 2 July were also seemed irrelevant. However, representatives of the Kiev government participated in drafting them. The broadly proclaimed peace plan of President Poroshenko became actually pretext for military preparations and the deployment of a punitive operation. The Kiev government has decided to stamp out dissenters. After the February uprising, dissenters with Kiev were called bandits and terrorists, and then some sort of insects or non-humans. Is it fortuitous that on Channel 5 of the Ukrainian television under Mr. Poroshenko, there was a commercial shown stamping out insects against the backdrop of a map of eastern Ukraine? There has been violent repression of those in Mariupol and Odessa. The number of victims continues to rise. Dozens have disappeared, and they are those who politically opposed Kiev. The promised reform of the constitution is being prepared in secret. It would seem that Kiev would like to garner its support from European structures and then give it to its lucky people. Indeed, according to reports, the distribution of powers from the president of the parliament, which was a problem in the Maidan for months, is actually not being planned for. Is it surprising that violence has arisen from this type of strategy? The political representatives of these regions are well known, and their policies have long been participating in Ukraine and have come to the forefront over the past months. In bringing them into dialogue would allow for a prevention of a further exacerbation of the crisis, but Kiev chose to arrest them, beat them, and threaten them. Sir, regarding the Ukrainian crisis, the international institutions haven't risen to the occasion. The reason is with our Western partners. Much is said, but to settle the situation, nothing is done. It's hard to work in the OSCE. Here, in the Security Council, the Russian delegation 3 times proposed for serious work on a resolution which would allow for halting of violence in Ukraine. But Western colleagues responded to our proposal with blatant cynicism. It seems that whatever the government arbitrarily does is judged favorably. But it seems that the victims of the geopolitical ambitions of the regime are actually a whole people, the people of Ukraine. Sir, the punitive operation in eastern Ukraine needs to be stopped as soon as possible. Negotiations for the crisis are still possible, but the right choice must be made. Thank you.
Representative